Hey, welcome everyone to the first ever Whimsey Watch Monthly Report. This is actually, even though we're recording this in February, this is actually going to be based on all the data that came out in January of 2021. So let's go and meet everyone that's going to be joining us today. Hi, I am Nick, the Duke of Hobbies. We also got Jake, Panux Abrams,
What's going
and
on, guys?
the Whimsy Watch himself, Chuck Charlie Bromack.
What's up, guys?
What's
All
going
right.
on, Chuck? Hey, why are you not on video?
Because I don't have a camera to show my face.
Oh,
Rip.
he's keeping it a mystery.
Yeah, he's a mystery man.
Maybe what we'll do is we'll get you one of those. We'll get you like a whimsical like vlog. You could be like one of those VTubers. So
You can just throw up a good old Whimsicott GX card in my window pane.
all right.
That works for sure.
So the point of this video with everyone here is we're actually going to be talking about a lot of the data over the month that Chuck actually compiled for us, going through all of January. We want to do this at least once a month, and that way we can kind of highlight the trends that we saw. To note though, all this data is coming from Limitless. We will talk a little bit of Paylayers Cup 3 at the bottom, which was all that information was coming from Celia's network at the time of his video that he did, which all the links will be in the description. And currently right now, we can't really take a ton of data from Limitless. We're getting the permissions. We want to do this properly through the proper channels. In the future, what we hope to do is actually scrape all the tournament information and then be able to really show you deck breakdowns throughout these tournaments rather than just a kind of a standard archetype. So with that out of the way, let's get to the first set of the data here, which is just total number of players in the week. I think this is kind of interesting here, but Chuck, you said it best in one of your Whimsy watches here. We have a high number here, and then going into the last week, what was happening there for us?
Well, I think the last week it was a week where a lot of tournaments just didn't run that week. The first 3 weeks we've had more than one tournament a day, but I usually have at least one a day to look at that I take results from. And I noticed multiple off days for certain tournaments in that fourth week, which just also happened to coincide with the beginning of the Players Cup 3. So, I mean, that might have, some organizers might have decided to just skip that week. Because I know, like, the Sunday Open didn't run that week.
Right.
A lot of the smaller stuff, like maybe the things I look at, like Funny Bunny, I don't remember if they had one.
I don't think they did.
I don't think I had anything from Atlas come through that week, or the Stone series. It was basically just Chill and I think and Hegster was the big guys that ran that week. And the numbers we had was basically because there was a couple really big tournaments.
Right. And also to note, a lot of this tournament data is only from the larger tournaments. So from the larger pool of tournaments, we're excluding a lot of the tinier events, just again, because not that we're trying to skew the data or anything. This is just a good snapshot of what is currently being played.
I generally try and look at something that usually has 50 or more players. I will go a little bit below, like maybe like 40 some, but I stick away from the real small, like 20s or things like that, just because then the results there can get skewed when you're playing such shorter rounds.
Right. And I think the other interesting to note too, when we get to our next set of data, is the fact that this was that month where ADP was banned by Limitless. But let's go into here and see what everyone was playing in terms of the month of January. So Jake, how about you break us down and go through each of the bigger chunks here?
All right, yeah. So we got 18% ADP, even with Limitless banning him, which is the meta share. So he's still the number one deck amongst competitive players as far as trying to win any given tournament. Followed closely by Eternidus I'm not sure if this is the poison variant or just a straightforward variant, or maybe kind of a combination between, but Eternit is still super solid, able to one-shot a lot of things with either, the Zigzagoon things or a kind of poison kind of thing. So
Right.
very, very solid deck. And then, 14% of the meta share kind of tied between Scorch. We know how that can just ramp up the late game. Those Scorches are so dangerous, being able to one-shot basically anything. And Pikarom is that deck that just has the answers. Maybe not the most favorable matchup in everything, but it has the most play arounds in all the matches. So it has favorable matches, against most anything they can do well, with Raichu, or Bolton hitting big time, or just the energy spread with Pikarom itself. So very solid there. Followed just under, those guys were all double digits in percentages played. Luke Metal was really, really close at 9%. Luke Metal is the best tanky deck out there. Energy Denial with the full metal wall, super good. And just being able to tank in Malolana and really has a good matchup spread. Even if the fire's out there, if they don't have that Giratina, it can still compete against those fire decks for sure. Going after that, another fire deck is Blacephalon, probably the best overall one prize deck because it's just able to one shot all of those guys ahead of it. And when you're trading prizes from, one prize to 3 prizes, always super solid. Blacephalon is. Past that, we got Colossal at 6%, which
6%.
It is a good deck. I would say it's probably that first deck that's in that B tier range. It's not quite at the top as far as consistent and also able to just hit hard. It can tank well. It can be consistent, and it does have that fighting type. So it does hit for weakness against a good portion of these big decks. And it even has a decent matchup against ADP, but it can definitely struggle against a lot of these other decks that are kind of not taking as much of the meta share, but are still on this list. So Colossal's there, followed by Mad Party. Mad Party, it can definitely struggle with ADP, but it also is one of those single prize decks that could just hit really, really hard. It doesn't take too much to get it going, and in late game, if it's close, they're already at the point where they have so many Mad Partiers in the discard pile that they don't have to work very hard towards the end game if they set it up early. So very understandable why that's there. Then we got a 5% other.
Let's real quick before we go on to the last one with Desigoon there.
Yeah.
Chuck, explain the other category because you're the one compiling all the stats.
Yeah.
So let's let our listeners and watchers, understand what is this category. And you had an interesting note that you wanted to bring up about it too.
The other category usually doesn't sit as high as it does this week, as it did. It's the compiled of most deck archetypes that gets played maybe once, twice a month. They're not really worth putting into separate categories because if I had the spreadsheet to show you, I track over 70 different archetypes individually. But then there's certain ones that are just they're home brews that people make. They're weird things that you wouldn't think to put together, and I usually just throw them in the other category. But the other category kind of grew big because halfway through the month, that Alolan Muck Control came out, and the way I keep track of stats is kind of hard to add a new archetype in the middle of the month, so I started sticking it in other.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know that it was going to catch fire the last week that it did, because it became popular and grew the category up. Not popular in that ADP numbers, but when you think the rogue category of 5 or 6 a tournament, it just bumps those numbers up. And then it started making cuts. So then you see other you have to see other make top cuts. So then it made the the top 10 here.
Yeah,
and
I
that's
mean,
the category it is. And it's just the Alolan Muck be actually a lot of the numbers that are in that other came from the Alolan Muck stuff.
right.
Yeah, I mean, when a deck pops off like that, people definitely do jump on that train or that bandwagon and want to give it a try. So they definitely does boost any deck like that that just kind of pops up and oh, we want to try something new because standard is kind of stale in most people's eyes. So definitely they'll see something like that and jump on it.
Yeah, again, the reason why we wanted to talk about it is it skewed the data a little bit, and so let's actually go through over the week by week breakdown. So you're going to see these same exact decks play with the number of plays in each week out of all those tournaments. So
Before we go there, we go back to your other slide. We do need to mention the Decigoons.
Okay, yeah.
Because that is very, very important. As one of those decks that you'll see in this 3% right now. But since it's down like that, we could expect it to jump up from like 3% to 9% because nobody's teching for it. And if that's the case, that's when that deck becomes dangerous because nobody respects it at the moment with this 3% play. So definitely it's the time where since nobody's respecting it, it could definitely jump up in that like Luke Metal ranges percentage played and really stall out all of these top decks until they start respected again with their respective counters, and then it will jump back down to that number. But it's definitely worth bringing up that it is down. So it's kind of dangerous because it's this low played because people are probably not teching for it.
Right. Well, okay, so going into the next into this slide here again, this is those same decks all just broken down in a week by week. So the bottom going up in each of these here. So we have week 1 is in the blue, week 2 in the red, week 3 in the gray, and then week 4 in the gold again. So just kind of like with the player count. I think the interesting thing to note here is between ADP and PeakROM in week 1 were tied. 238 people played them. But following that, we just see this massive drop in PeakROM and ADP, but not as much as PeakROM. And then that trend continued for PeakROM while it actually reversed for ADP there. So we go from 238 to 156 for ADP. And then the third week, all the way back up to 216, which, wow, that's quite a jump all of a sudden. And then as we saw in the total number of players being played and the limited number of tournaments that were actually happening, all of them in week 4 shut down. So that is true for across the board. Just kind of interesting side notes. Do you have anything else you want to bring up on this slide here?
Just the way I saw that breaking out, like the PeakROM, the first week, it really like I feel like that was the week they announced the ban. Limitless put their ban out, and then like I felt like the community was like, all right, well, we're gonna make PeakROM the top deck anyway. And I saw a big push of PeakROM decks being played, and it pushed ADP. They basically tied it for meta share by trying to be played more often. Whereas then after they did it, they just kind of like, let's take a vacation from PeakROM, and everyone stopped playing. And then like kind of in week 3 though, those players had to have I think some of those players just had to transition into Eternatus because it jumped.
Yeah.
As you can see from that graph.
Yeah. Going from 176 to 157. Now week 2 was an overall drop in number of players in general, but then week 3, which was a high, again, not as many players as week 1, but a big increase. Eternatus takes the spot at 231, which big change there. And I think I remember during that time it was pretty much even in the ladder. Everything was Eternatus. So everything was just Eternatus, and it was mind blowing how much it was actually being played.
And part of that, a lot of what I mean, as I keep doing this more months, I see it kind of why and how things evolve, and a lot of that is based on what is winning at the time. So like coming into the month, PeakROM was winning a lot. So that's why you see it spiking a lot at the beginning. And then Eternatus, which was also the winningest deck over everything I looked at in terms of tournament wins over the month of January. you see it. That's why in those later weeks, the meta sees that it's winning, so then everyone starts to try and get on the train.
Yeah.
That is Eternatus trying to win.
Right. I actually, Jake, I'll let you talk here in a second, because I think there was one big tweet that came out in the middle of January, and that was Zach Lesage tweeting his Eternatus build. And I know that got me back on playing Eternatus. I saw that and many other of his followers, and you know how Twitter can be a good spread point for decks right now. But I don't think the numbers lie here. Eternatus is a good deck, and for winning at tournaments over January, it was the most winning deck at 26%. So
I think the biggest thing with Eternatus and that kind of jump in popularity, especially starting week 3 and beyond, is that's when you saw the energy spinners like really become popular, and it kind of was like a mind shift in the community as far as how you play it, because basically most of the time you want to go first, attaching energy, and then whatever you can build up, and then fine, you're good to go as long as you got an Eternatus and an energy down. But really with the energy spinners, it made it really good to go second with that deck.
Yep.
Because you could do the energy spinner, find multiple energies to guarantee his energy XL to a backup Eternatus, really setting the deck up for that big hit into its second turn, going second. So it was almost consistently almost guaranteed, unless people were just rolling hammerheads like above 50%. It really kind of countered the hammers.
Right.
So you were definitely able just to knock out, even if they got like a Pikarom, for example, up and hit and then like accelerated 3 energies, you're still probably knocking out that Pikarom the next turn because of that kind of mindset and the kind of change in the deck, in the mindset, I guess, as a whole, as a community.
Yeah, and I want to say that it is there. Another thing that could happen is because of the hammers, and again, I think it was a tech. Zach built it to tech against hammers, because if Eternatus is not attaching properly, it's pretty much game over, right?
Mm-hmm.
And an odd, weirdly counter is the fact that if both energy gets hit by hammers off, you still had a rose or 2 in the deck that allowed Eternatus to still follow up with an immediate attack the very next turn. And that caught a lot of players off guard. So
yeah, but I don't know if in general Rose was like
it wasn't Rose. It was that acceleration, but you had the options to recover.
Because the spinners, not only did you guarantee energy, it was also a great resource for Crobat. If you like late game or early game, because a lot of times if you just had more energies in your deck, you would be stuck with those energies and then you Crobat for less cards. So it was just one other card on top of like the consistency early. It was also a card where you can kill your hand size to get a higher draw with the Crobat. So it was kind of like twofold. But I mean, definitely Rose has seen the most play this last month than it has since it came out.
Right. So with this table here that you guys can see on the screen and everything, this is the best way we could think of actually putting this together, and how you can break this down. Again, is total number of players here for each of these deck archetypes, as we talked above. The win percentage is their tournament win percentage. The top cut is making the cut for the event. So that does vary based on the number of players that are actually being cut. But again, it is the top cut. Or this is actually, top cut is actually getting to the final table, if I'm reading that correctly. And then cut rate is making into the cut, basically day 2. But then overall win percentage, I want to kind of bring this up a little bit, is the fact that look how close all these are to 50%. Chuck, like, what's your takeaway on this?
Just to clarify, like the top cut, that is the percentage of decks that make the top cut. So it's basically like a meta share of the top cut.
Right.
And then
top cut being final 2.
Final 2, yeah.
No, like if it's the tournament's top 8, that not just the top 2, like it's the top 8 decks.
Okay, that makes sense. So whatever that given tournament cut is, that's what the percentage.
Whatever given tournament's cut is, they all get put into a pool, and that percentage of that pool is Eternatus.
Okay, then what's the cut rate then?
Yeah, what's the
The cut
difference?
rate is the percentage that Eternatus makes a top cut. So like it's the total not times that Eternatus makes a top cut divided by the number of players.
Okay.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Okay, so top cut is cut rate for whatever archetype that is.
Yeah.
Then the cut rate is percentage of players that make the
Right.
cut with any given deck.
Yeah, it's basically like how
out of all the players versus rather than the players playing that deck.
Yeah, so if there were 100
Gotcha.
players, 10 people made cut with ADP, but 16 of them actually made the cut, I guess.
Yeah, it doesn't work not exactly, but you're getting it.
Yeah, okay.
We'll get it figured out. This is the first one.
This is our first time. Sorry.
Yeah. No, but I think again the more important thing to talk about here is the win rate, though, because again, Chuck, like take this away on this.
The win rate is really what I wanted to look at, because of those top 5 you're seeing, with I think Pikarom having a little bit of a oddity in the last week in bringing it down under 50, but those top 5, like the ADP, the Eternatus, Centiskorch, you see the massive amount of times they're being played, but they're still winning 50% of the time. It's that consistency that leads them to be the choice to be the top 5 decks. It's why they're constantly being high number of the meta share, why they're winning tournaments, why they're making cut rates as much as they do. It's the simple choice right there of why they're being chosen as often as they are, because of that consistency in its winning.
Right, but it's interesting though, is like this is showing how I read this is, again, this is showing the average player with one of these deck archetypes is essentially a 50%. It's a coin flip, almost a coin flip, that you're going to win the game for an average player.
These win weights are not taking in any kind of player skill at all.
Right. And so if we will hopefully in the future be able to actually take a specific player and be able to look at their runs with the deck, like if they play very similar or closest decks between multiple tournaments throughout the month, we might be able to see, like, I use this example in our pre-talk about this, was like Thomas Bothy and Cashman playing Centiskorch all the time. Maybe we see Centiskorch for them is like 80 to 90% win rate. So that might be, again, that's how I view these win rates, which is interesting in terms of the meta. Understanding the meta and looking at the game overall is kind of a coin flip. But I know you had a very interesting point that you brought up in our pre-talk about Decigoon. You want to elaborate on Decigoon?
Yeah, I wanted to bring that up because as the reasoning of what I just said is they're these top 5 are over 50%. And then you go to the bottom of the list and you see Decigoon at 53, and you're like, well, why isn't that part of the top decks? Why isn't it? Because there's not a graph that I can make to show how Decigoon plays out. But in compiling all the data, most of the time when I'm putting in its wins and losses, most of the decks end up being 50-50. Like they end up 2-2, or if they 4-4, with the odd deck that makes the cut, and then they go 7-3 or 7-3-1, or they have basically a winning percentage. And gradually, that deck is going to have an above 50% win rate, because it'll win 50% of the time still, because it counters everything else above it. And it's basically a legit coin flip deck on whether you're going to win in general, because most of the time it makes top cut 3% of the time, or it has a 10%. It can make a top cut, but it's only there for 3% of the time, because once it gets there, all it needs to do is run into its kryptonite, and then it's out.
Well, when you say 3% cut rate, like I was going back, beforehand on the other slide, they win that 50% plus because it's so low percentage of played. So again, when they're low percentage of played, decks won't account for that.
Correct.
But if that top cut number rises, then they'll find that kryptonite more times than not, and then it will shoot that back down. with that deck in particular.
Correct. The cut rate on Desagoon at 10% is a little deceptive because for it to be at 10%, all it needed was, I think, 10 players to make cut out of the 107.
The
and
top
it's at 10%.
cut, the top cut is interesting to take a look at and compare that to the ADP Eternatus here, because its top cut is only 3%, while you'll see these guys 15 to 16, 15%. That's a much better number. That's the number that this is the consistency that separates the average players from the skilled players, essentially, and why a skilled player can take this top cut this deck and they'll be more consistent and win with it. So,
and to give those percentages a little bit of a number so you can have a little bit of understanding. The top cut is based off of how many total top cut spots. So it's 418 spots that I had for the whole month.
Okay.
So that's 16%. That for ADP, that's 67 different ADPs that were in top 8s, top 4s, top 16s, whereas that 3% for Desagoon is 11 times over the month.
Yeah.
So out of all the tournaments that we looked at, 11 Desagoons made a top cut, which equates to a 10% cut rate.
So I don't know if you guys have any other talking points, but I find it very interesting. We're looking at this top cut, and we got ADP through Luke Metal all in the double digits as far as percentage of making cut. ADP being at the top. With 16, just above Senate Scorch and Eternatus. But then you slide over to the left, just one category, and you always see an 8% actual win rate. So that's drastically different from even, the next 3 below it, where it is, especially Eternatus. That's just over 1 every 4 tournaments Eternatus is winning.
Yep.
And so it's making the cut slightly less consistent, but it's winning the cut way more consistently.
That's this is one of the main reasons I've wanted to do look at like this meta breakdown in general, because I've heard a lot of people say that ADP is like the best deck in format. It's the BDF. But then when I look at it over a month and it doesn't win. But
it's one of those things, and I'm sorry to cut you off. It's one of those things where basically it's not that it's the best deck. It's always the gatekeeper.
It's the gatekeeper, and it's the most straightforward out of these top decks. I mean, all these are basically pretty straightforward. But ADP,
I would say ADP and Eternatus are pretty much straightforward.
They are very straightforward. But okay, let me put it this way. ADP has been at the top of the meta since Sword and Shield base.
Right.
So yeah, with different variations, but basically the same heart and soul, the same, base of the deck. So yes, it has a very straightforward win percent or win con, but everybody actually knows how to play against it and what its weaknesses are. The other decks, I mean, they're there, so I guess there's a little bit less of that familiarity of how to play against it, like compared to ADP, I guess. So I guess because it's the gatekeeper, all these other decks have answers for it, and ADP doesn't necessarily have an answer for these decks as far as a tech, because it's just so straightforward in what it wants to do.
Right.
And part of that is, I think is that, part of that I think is because I think when you go down the list, like Eternatus, Senate Scorch, ADP does well in making a cut because it's consistent in what it wants to do. So if your goal is to make a cut in something, ADP is a really good choice in doing that.
Yeah.
You're trying to win it. The decks below it, Eternatus, Senate Scorch, Pikarom, those ones give you the nuances to overcome areas where ADP might not be able to. Like, it doesn't always have to be a straightforward Alter Creation boss win.
Yeah.
Like, Eternatus and Senate Scorch, Pikarom have different variations and ways for you to overcome and then grab victories. And as if you're Eternatus, grab victories at an alarmingly good rate.
Yeah. One other kind of nuance I want to kind of add to this is, yeah, so the cut rate is higher. And a lot of times when you're playing in those, the round robins, you're playing against, you might find those top level players like Thomas Brophy or Zach Massage or whatnot. But you are also playing against those mid-level players. I would say somebody like myself. And then you also find, you run into a lot of those players that are new to the game or just for some reason haven't really caught on. So your percentage of playing players that are above or average or above average is a lot lower. So that might kind of skew your win percentage. But then once you make that cut, you're more likely to run into Thomas Brophy or Zach Massage or any of these other bigger players. So I think that's another big reason why there's such a drastic drop from the top cut to actual win percentage.
I also want to bring up one last thing is I love the fact that Mad Party 8% win rate. Like that is awesome to see Mad Party taking tournaments and that probably was due to the fact that Limitless tournaments didn't have ADP in there. So this is a deck that we will be paying attention to throughout February and see if it's still going to be, have that win percentage. The other decks I want to say that we'll probably see actually disappear or morph is going to be Blacephalon. We'll get to that in a second with Players Cup 3 talk, because I think this is going to morph into Temposard. This one, we're going to just see this name basically change in a weird way. I know you had that in your spreadsheet, Chuck. You had Temposard in there, but it was shy. I think it was like 15 to 12 in there, but it was close. It wasn't enough, and we wanted to keep this down to just to the 10. So, I mean,
I also think that in looking at the stats there's a lot of people still just trying that out. It's not
right. And its win rate was probably really low because a lot of people don't like, there's a lot of variations on it, and there's definitely stronger versions of it out there. And then it takes some skill to understand and learn and get to the deck. So with that being said, let's go into Players Cup 3 talk here now. So all this data is coming from Celios Network's video. We're going to have a link to that where he reached out to all these players, is the top 13. He was able to get the information from them. And he has all the deck profiles in that video too. So if you want further insight on what they're playing, but for so far in Players Cup 3, the top 13 at that time of that recording of the video, this is what we had. Number 2 being a Temposard deck. So this is what I was talking about earlier as we saw, like I think Baby Blacephalon is going to be replaced with this one just because of the popularity of Temposard and people understanding it. Where it's a mishmash of Camarant. It's a welder focused deck, which really that's what it should be called.
It really should just be welder box.
Yeah, well, it is a welder box. So you can fit it with doubles, you can fit it with baby blunts, 1 or 2, and this one has 1. Centiscorch, interestingly, is coming up, and it comes up twice in here, number 3 and number 11 here, where instead of Heatran in both of these decks, it is Reshazard, which I find very interesting, is being a quick tech change. And I think it's, instead of that trying to get to a lot of energy on the board in a switch, it's a 300 damage GX attack, call it a day, move on.
Isn't it 200? Yeah, I mean, at least
I doubt in that deck it's going to ever get to 300.
Yeah, it's a 200. Yeah. Sorry, it is the 200 attack.
That Reshi is there to donk decks, because if you're going second and they have a bad start, you can definitely just welder for win right off the bat.
Right. And quick damage is good damage. So
yeah.
But then I find this interesting is we had a lower win percentage in terms of in tournaments with this, but Luke Melmetal might be coming with 2 decks at 4 and 10th spots in the rankings. Basically, these 2 were the same. And then number 13 was another one with only 1 card difference, where they put in an Aegis/V in the deck. So the 8 total Pokemon in both of these is 4 Zacians, 2 Luke Melmetals, and 2 Zamazenas. Very focused on not taking damage, only doing what the wall wants to do. And it is, it's my version I've had for a little bit too, and it is phenomenal. So I highly
You're
suggest
talking about the
buying.
number 4 spot, Luke
Yeah,
Metal.
number 4 here. Yeah,
I do find with Luke Metal though, in this type of Players Cup format, I think it can do well because it's basically saying you need to win 3 in a row,
right.
and it's a type of deck that can do that because it has fairly decent matchups against most of the top decks you're going to see. Like
Yeah,
you
so-
just have to be
So
able to
Luke
execute.
Metal, I would say it's favored in the ADP matchup. It could definitely go the ADP way. I think it's very unfavored against both those fire decks above it.
Right.
Pika Rom is very 50-50. It really depends on the players and the builds. It could go either way. Against the rest of that stuff, I against Eternatus, it does very well. Against
Right.
Colossal, it does very well. Against those one prizers, it does very well.
Right. Right. And that's why I wanted to say is that you can see on this list is Saturnus only shows up once at the time of the of Celio's video. So, and that was Stephen Maxlow.
Just had him on.
Yeah, we just had him on. So
The Eternal
FTK,
God.
it was the Eternal God doing amazing work with it, and he built his to tech against Luke Melmetal specifically. So again, we had the poison variant for which had a good options against a bunch of decks, and then we saw that switch to the being able to counter hammers. But now it's kind of like this mishmash of it's no poison. It doesn't really rely on the energy spinners, but Spirit Tomb and Stabilize is its best friend because it needs to take out Zamazenta.
I've seen a lot of people kind of tech in that Spirit Tomb, but since the beginning of Eternatus, you saw a lot of a Stabilize, and he really, really jumped down or just kind of fell out of that deck. But he's definitely seeing a huge rise in a lot of the the Eternatus variants. Regardless if it's Max Low's version or not, you do see that Stabilize starting to jump in there.
Right. Now, I find it interesting, and this is this is the current set of Pikarom and Mad Party for 5 and 7 spot. So Pikarom with the Mew 3 and pretty much everything that you kind of see. So it makes sense. There's going to be a player that's getting up in the upper spot. I bet you we see a lot more Pikarom at lower in the rankings, but it's going to be hard to get that data just because this is just sharing from players. So we don't know what 1 was, we don't know what 6, and we don't know what 8 were. So they could have been Pikaroms also. Again, I think we're going to see that closer to, like, Jake, you're a Pikarom player,
yes.
And you're on pace right now in the 80 range. I have a feeling Pikarom will be in that range a lot too. So, but Mad Party being at spot number 7, this deck hasn't changed in basically a month, but it's the Giovanni Exile one. And when players win with it, if you can catch the right player with it against, and I think we see this with the same with the Luke Melmetal, if a player's not ready for it, they're just going to get caught off guard. So,
yeah, I mean, with the Giovanni's Exile, it does definitely give Mad Party, more of a chance, because before that, I mean, Pikarom was slightly favored. You would say probably same thing with Santa Scorch, Eternatus, but really those matchups, they were really depending on killing those Crobats and the Sedenes. But now, if Mad Party has a well-timed Giovanni's Exile, the prize trade is just heavily in the favor of Mad Party.
Right.
ADP is still a very bad matchup for it because they don't care.
Right, but again, out of the available decks right here, not a single one of those is ADP that we know of, which is very interesting because it kind of seems that like a lot of the better top tier players are figuring, look, everyone knows how to play against it. This is more consistent, or this is what they're finding a lot more.
I would argue to say that probably ADP is number 1 because
very good
it
chance.
is a very good deck for newer players to play because you don't necessarily it's very forgiving. But in the same level, the ceiling is so high with that deck for those really, really top players that can sequence well or kind of read the board state, and they can win a game just on an all wild GX play that's well timed. So that deck does have a lot of tools in its arsenal.
I would argue
I would say maybe it's not on the list because top players don't want to admit they're playing that deck.
That
I
could be true. This is just word of mouth. So
Yeah.
without any official data.
I could argue that one of those three that we don't know is probably an probably an ADP player.
No, I would say it's the one at the very, very top.
Yeah.
Just based on the numbers of percentage played on the chart beforehand,
Right,
or
right.
percentage of making top cuts, 16. There,
Yep.
so that deck is being played a lot. There's no way that it's not the same at the top of this list. I would just, estimate,
This
educate.
is the one thing though that I think my main takeaway for what I wanted to talk about this is Players Cup 3 should have all the data released. This is something that creatures could come out with, Pokemon could release, and a lot of people would appreciate just seeing all the deck archetypes out there.
Yeah.
So, or like the most played card, and I mean, or most played Pokemon. I think that would be really neat because it would just be a lot of really cool data that they could share and kind of help kind of show what's going on. And maybe that influences rollings or changes for the game or card creation for future cards later down the line for them so that they can understand. I don't know. I'm a big proponent of when it comes to having data, letting everyone know, have access to it. So that's why I appreciate again all the Chuck, what you do here. You collect a lot of this data and get it to us because this is really interesting. So thank you for compiling all the earlier data, and also thank you to Luke, Celia's Network, for getting this data for us because this is really interesting stuff. So
I mean, just compiling. All I do is data entry and putting it in a way that you can look at it multiple different ways, and you can make cool, fancy charts to it. But yeah, Luke's the one with the connections to get the Players Cup 3 data. He's the one that can DM guys just to find out what they're doing.
Yeah,
so
he's awesome when it comes to meta breakdowns and kind of things like that. But
there is real quick, Jake. There is
yeah.
one quick number 9. We didn't talk about this. This version of the deck, if you want to look at the list, is a true Mew all over the box. It has the Vileplume. It has a whole lot of different variations in there. Uses a lot of Aurora energy, I believe. So I just wanted to break that up. That way, all the
Gengar
listeners know.
Mimikyu kind of version.
Yeah, it's mostly a welder deck. It is mostly a fire deck, but it has options with those different variations that it can use. So, but yeah, there's one of those in the top 13. So it's an interesting deck. I think a lot of players haven't seen it in a while. So it's another one that might catch a lot of players off guard. And it can take an easy win sometimes.
It does have a lot of options. It's very well versed, but there's definitely some glaring weaknesses. Power plants, stamps, stuff like that.
Yep.
Well, Welder Mew is the best performing of the Mew variants.
Right.
If you look at them all separately.
Right. Yeah. You show that in the data. So.
Yeah, and we're not including Mewtwo with the Mew 3 because that's not really a true Mew 3 box with different kind of attackers. It's really just a Pikarom deck that has Mewtwo in it.
Well, it's a weakness guard. It's a built-in weakness guard because it was the
more
counter.
HP,
It was
and less retreat.
Right. So, all right. So when it comes to Players 3 Cup here data, the only other kind of data that we have at the time is Jake has played the most tournaments out of 3 of us here. So Jake, if you want to talk about some of the decks that you've been playing and what you've seen, go.
Okay. So I'm just going to strictly talk about what I've faced, and the majority. I don't have the percentages, but I do have. I did play 52 total matches in Players Cup at the moment. And I'm just kind of taking from these top decks. And so I'm just going to start down at the top from what I started with. So out of those 52 total matches, I only ran into a 1 Luke medal.
Wow.
Which is very surprising for me. From what we're seeing on this chart, that's not really what's matching up. I guess I just got lucky in that sense, depending on, or unlucky or
could
lucky.
Be region. It could be, there's a couple other factors. So, well, this is all North America data.
This is all, no, you can play against anybody in the world in this. So I know for a fact I've played against people that are not in our region.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean, region, it's not really considered in this. I don't think. But yeah, just let's go on. So again, out of the 52 total matches, I've played 8 Pikaroms. So that kind of matches up with what we're seeing here. Baby Blacephalon, I've only seen 1. Eternatus 5, which seems a little low, but still kind of in that play percentage play. I guess since it's only 12 on this list, it kind of matches up. ADP definitely, I would say, is in the number 1 spot because that's what I've faced the most, and that's at 12 times out of 52.
Yeah, that's 23%.
Yeah,
of
so
what you face. So.
that's a majority there. Centiskorch at 6, and that's both variants of the Jirachi version and the Civ Valley version. I'm just kind of lumping them in one. I didn't kind of break it down like this does.
Right.
Colossal 2 and Decidueye 1. Decidueye again is one of those decks that kind of is really low when it's low and then high when it's high, and there's kind of no in between with that one.
Yeah. So I mean, at this point, I'm probably going to continue playing with I've been playing a kind of a mix with Centiskorch and Colossal, but I've been practicing on the side for a little while Luke Melmetal, and I'm probably going to be bringing that back. I did, out of spite, play Inteleon. I was just really angry. I was like, fine, I'm bringing my Inteleon back. And I faced 3 Centiskorches in a row, and I took the win that way. So
so that was your one tournament win.
That was my one tournament win because I got the matchup variation I was looking for.
Well, you look at this list and you see a lot of fire.
Yeah, there's a lot of fire. And like I said, like Tempo Zard is one of those ones where it's the hot deck in my mind in terms of what's being talked about. Like, I don't know how many videos have come out now on it. So, and it does impact it. You see it in the ladder, and it's kind of like, but if again, I took water. It wasn't the best plays. I just had the huge advantage in there. So that is an anecdotal. That is not enough data. Don't go water.
Don't go water with Pikarom being out there, being one of the most popular percentage played decks out there.
Right.
I know the win percentage is under 50% in this chart, but I think that's because it is such a easy to acquire deck, and since it's such a popular deck amongst like top players,
right,
you do have those new players that are kind of driving that number down.
Right, and the interesting thing to see here is that these are clumped together. One of the things that we don't know when we look at this data right now, and hopefully we will see in the future when we can actually scrape the data, is like how many Boltons are in a deck, because like some of these Pikaroms might be Pikaroms without a Bolton, which is a big difference.
At this point, I doubt it.
I doubt it, but
in the beginning, yes, but at this point, I think 2 is bare minimum.
I don't know how Limitless works, but there are there's got to be certain requirements on how it breaks it into archetypes. Because when you go look at Limitless's tournaments, right, they have archetypes broken down, and Pikaroms can be built wildly different. Like a Pikarom with Mew and will come up as Pikarom, and a Pikarom without it will come up as Pikarom.
Right.
So you are correct in the sense that like you don't know exactly how they're built, and you can have some poorly built decks. But I do know like certain times, like I've seen ADPs that are built with just like for whatever reason they only put 1 or 2 Zacians in it, and it won't come up as an ADP. It won't. It will not. It won't come up as
that's because it's not an ADP.
Yeah.
You need to run 4 Zacians.
It's not ADPZ.
Yeah.
It's not 80. It won't come up as ADPZ.
Right.
I usually throw it in there as a poorly built ADPZ, but when stat keeping, because it obviously is trying to be, but it's just not built right.
So
it's probably somebody that just bought one of those league battle decks and jumped in because it comes with 2.
Yeah.
Basically, and no more than that.
Basically, why we wanted to talk about this, though, again, is looking in the future as these videos keep coming out for us, these once a month. Hopefully, we'll be able to actually do that deck breakdown. So I look forward to that. Chuck, I know you look forward to that. Maybe we'll be able to make your job a little easier, less little hand work here. So and more full data compilation. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see how we evolve and go from here. So, closing, I think that's going to about do it for us, though. So let's go through closing thoughts. We'll start with Chuck. Do you have any other last Whimsey Watch Monthly report thoughts?
No, I mean, we went over a lot of it. I mean, these are really the top 10 that I see a lot of the time. I kind of really want Colossal to like move up higher. Like it's the only one that like I scratch my head at when I look at this chart, because I mean, Blacephalon, I get where it is. It's like a one prizer and it has a lot of moving parts in it, but it can kill anything above it. But then Colossal, like, it looks good. You look at it on paper. It's one of those things like you look at it on paper, like this should be good, but then it just can't win enough.
So I think the problem with Colossal is it is a very consistent deck if you know how to play it. But for newer players, it's very easy to misplay it and sequence wrong and then actually mess up your attack and not have an energy on that top deck. And that could really kind of screw it up, because I know I haven't played against it a lot in Players Cup, or really on the ladder a whole lot, but I would say at least 50% of the time I play against it in any fashion online, my opponent is misplayed, where they meant to put the energy on the top one way or another, and wasn't able to do so, or just didn't sequence correctly and still had what they needed in hand, but they forgot that they Oregarued. So I think that deck definitely has potential, but I think also it just has a lot of potential for misplay.
Right.
Because if you look at the top four, ADP is it's very, at least 50-50 in my experience playing against it and with it. Eternatus, it's very, very good matchup. It should be at least 90% win percentage there. Centiskorch, maybe below 50%, but not unwinnable. And then Pikarom, especially with that the Mimikyu, that's a very favorable matchup as well. So out of those top four, like, it's either to almost 50% or very favorable. So you would think that number should be higher than 44 for sure.
I mean, again, it also comes down to who just playing it in general. So you got a lot of good players who are playing Centiskorch, Pikarom, and Eternatus, and they just might not like it. So you're you know, again, it's not to say that the players are not as good. It just might not be
It's not the sexy deck either.
Right.
It doesn't have it doesn't have that element of I will one shot you and there's nothing you can do about it. Or I'll take extra prizes, or the finesse of Pikarom where I'm like, I'm gonna stamp you and paralyze you and then kind of do switch outs and kind of just finesse. So it doesn't have any of those aspects. It's very just kind of straightforward where I'm gonna hit you and tank hits and maybe heal or get something else set up.
It's King Kong coming your way to stomp on you, and it eventually gets there, but it just takes a really long time.
In terms of like a sports analogy, Colossal's the one team that's relying purely on its system to win, its game plan.
Right.
Trust where everyone else has a superstar that's gonna just put points on the board, but Colossal's like, game plan, baby. Stick to the game plan.
Right. No, that's a good point. That is a great way to think about that deck. So I mean, I look forward to seeing how these evolve. These percentages, we'll kind of go back to these, I believe, in the future. Jake, did you have any last takeaways?
No, I think we kind of covered most everything. I think this is a very accurate representation of kind of where each deck is and kind of where it's falling in the percentage played and how we went over why. I just, for me, Pikarom's the deck because it is the most consistent. I mean, there's a lot of people, like these other decks are very hot and cold and can definitely whiff. And Pikarom's whiff percentage, especially early, is lower.
All right. Well, That's going to do it for us then today. Thank you again, Chuck, for putting all this together. The Whimsey Watch is one of my favorite segments in our podcast, which again comes out every Wednesday. For those who stuck around with us to the end here, again, we'll have all the links, all this information. We'll try and even share the spreadsheet if we can, the easiest way. We'll try and figure it out. But again, we're going to evolve this. So I hope you enjoyed this. Leave some comments down below.
Yes,
We
please
want to
do,
know what
please.
your feedback is, what you guys think of this. What do you want to see, and how would you like to see them broken down? Like I said, we'll evolve this as we get more and more permission and access to the data. And yeah, so thank you again for joining us. If you liked the video, give us a thumbs up. If you didn't, put a thumbs down. Let us know why we didn't do well. So
Blame Nick.
we'll see you later.
Have a good one, guys. Yeah, definitely leave a comment below. We definitely appreciate any kind of feedback we can do to improve and to make this better for you guys. So thanks again for watching.
I'm just going to echo that again. And if you guys want to see anything extra when it comes to stat breakdowns, leave a comment here, or even find me on Twitter at WatchWhimsey to hit me up directly to see if I can help out with it.
Yeah.
Yep, and you can DM myself at Canucks1 on Twitter as well.
Yep. Or just hit us in general. I'm Nick, the Duke of Hobbies, and that on Twitter. And then also we are Triple P at Pit Pokepod on Twitter for the Pittsburgh Pokemon Podcast. So thank you.
One last closing thought. I know this is not our podcast, but definitely go over to FloTcast and leave them a review roasting them, and then say that we sent you there.
Yep. All right. See you.